Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Wednesday, March 1st at 10 a.m. and we are here for a proceeding in docket number 2022-256-E. Before we begin, let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, Chair Belser, and with us virtually we have Commissioner Irvin. Let me recognize our staff counsel, Mr. Winburn, to read our docket this morning, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, commissioners and parties. We're here today for the proceeding in docket number 2022-56-E. I'm sorry, 256, regarding Duke Energy Progress LLC's petition for review and approval of storm recovery principal costs and an accounting order pursuant to South Carolina Code 58-27-1110. The proceeding has been scheduled for today, March 1st, 2023 at 10 a.m. Madam Chair, I believe all parties participating in this matter are available and the docket appears to be in order.
Thank you, Mr. Winburn. Thank you, Mr. Winburn. Let's take appearances from the parties. Who's representing Duke Energy Progress LLC?
Good morning, Chair Belser, Vice Chair Powers, members of the Commission. My name is Kamal Robinson, and I'm in-house counsel representing Duke Energy Progress LLC in this matter. With me today are my external counsel, Mr. Ashley Cooper and Ms. Kristen Athens. Chair Belser, Ms. Athens has been admitted pro hoc vice in this proceeding. Additionally, if it may please the Commission, I would like to introduce my paralegal, Allison Williams, who will ensure that any documents the company needs to hand out are properly provided to the Commission to the parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. And yes, I believe the Commission has already ruled on Ms. Athens' pro hoc vice application and has granted that. So welcome today. With our interveners, Nucor Steel, South Carolina.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Rob Smith on behalf of Nucor, South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Phil Porter, representing the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'm pinch hitting all day on these matters.
Okay, we can't hear you, Mr. Porter. We do live stream these days, and we need counsel to speak into the microphone, and there's a button down there. It's good to see you again.
So sorry.
No, that's fine.
Is that better?
Yes, sir.
I'm Phil Porter, representing the Department of Consumer Affairs. I'm pinch hitting for
Roger.
today, who has some matters at the General Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. It's good to have you back. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Chris Huber. I'm here on behalf of the Office of Regulatory Staff, and I'm joined by Alex Knowles and Donna Rainey, and the Executive Director of ORS, Nanette Edwards, is also in attendance today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Council, with our layout, you need to be heard more than anything. So please make sure to speak into microphones. You're welcome. I know it is kind of an anathema to what we're accustomed to as attorneys, but if you need to stay seated to speak into the microphone, you may do so, or you may go to one of the podiums on either side if you can get to it. It's kind of a maze here, but we want you to be comfortable when you're making your presentations, but we also need to hear you, and it needs to be heard over the live stream as well. So please don't be offended if I gently remind, or maybe not so gently remind people to talk into the microphone. So, are there any preliminary matters that need to come before us before we begin?
ORS does have one. Ms. Rainey will be presenting it.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Good morning, Ms. Rainey.
Good morning, Madam Chair Belser, Vice Chair Powers, and members of the Commission. I'm Donna Rainey on behalf of the Office of Regulatory Staff. And as a preliminary matter, all parties entered into a stipulation resolving certain issues in this proceeding. The stipulation was filed with this Commission on February 7th, 2023. I will provide further details regarding the stipulation in our opening statement, but generally the parties agree to terms such as a debt-only return for carrying costs, a correction to a formula to an error used in the calculation of certain carrying costs, removal of duplicate invoices or invoices that were allocated to South Carolina in error, and the withdrawal of ORS witness Harry Ott. Madam Chair, at this time, ORS requests that the stipulation filed with the Commission on February 7th, 2023 be entered in the record as a hearing exhibit.
Any objection to admission of the stipulation? Hearing none, the stipulation will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 1 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any further preliminary matters? I understand that the parties want to make opening statements, and we will start with Duke Energy Progress.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the company, we are pleased to be before you today, testifying to the first phase of the inaugural storm securitization proceeding in South Carolina, as permitted under Act 227, which passed just last summer. As the Commission is aware, the company was a proponent of the Act, as we believe it has the potential to provide cost savings to our customers while still allowing the utility to recover its prudently incurred costs for significant storm restoration efforts. This proceeding is the first of a multi-phase process to securitize our storm costs under the Act. This first phase is to establish the type and amount of storm costs eligible to be securitized. This phase consists of the company presenting its unrecovered balance of storm costs for the ORS and other parties to review and audit, and for the Commission to ultimately determine whether those costs were reasonable, prudent, and eligible to be securitized. The second phase of the process, the financing order phase, will be to take those costs that the Commission deems reasonable and prudent in this docket and present to the Commission a detailed plan on how the company proposes to proceed with securitizing those costs, as well as provide our estimates of the savings customers should expect to receive through the securitization process when compared to traditional methods of recovery. Assuming a favorable outcome in Phase 1, the company intends to move expeditiously once an order is issued to file a petition for a financing order, thus kicking off the process for Phase 2. Provided the Commission approves the company's plan in Phase 2 and makes the determination that the company's calculations are expected to produce savings to customers, the company will proceed with the Phase 3 process of actually going into the market pursuant to the terms of the Commission-issued financing order and achieving the best deal for customers that the market can provide for the Commission's consideration. We look forward to presenting testimony and the appropriate company witnesses to support Phases 2 and 3 before this Commission at the next stage. Turning back to the specifics of this proceeding, in its application, the company specifically requested 2 things of this Commission. 1, review and approve the company's storm restoration costs as a result of the 8 storms at issue in this case: Hurricanes Matthew, Florence, Michael, and Dorian, and winter storms Pax, Ulysses, Izzy, and Jasper. And 2, issue an accounting order permitting the deferral of incremental O&M expenses and carrying costs incurred in connection with Izzy and Jasper so that those costs too can be securitized. In support of these requests, company witness Pete Ware will be the first to testify, and he will provide a brief overview of each of these 8 storms, the resulting significant outages and damage resulting from these storms, and the company's efforts to restore power in a prompt and safe fashion. For example, you will hear him explain that Winter Storm Pax at the time was the most significant weather event to impact South Carolina since Hurricane Hugo in 1989 and affected approximately 300,000 customers. You will also hear him describe Hurricane Matthew, which was of considerable magnitude and caused significant damage to DEP's electric system, also on a scale similar to Hugo. The magnitude of the company's incurred costs is easily understood when you hear witness Ware describe these storms, their unique characteristics, the damage and destruction they caused, and the efforts needed to restore power within just a few days after each storm occurred. You will also hear from company witnesses Kim K. Smith and Melissa Colbreth, who will provide support for the company's deferred balances that the company incurred for those storms, its request for an accounting order, and explain the company's accounting processes, which consist of a robust system, including layers of review and audit, to accurately track and process storm costs. Commissioners, let me tell you, the ORS and its consultants performed one of the most extensive and robust audits of a subset of costs that I and others at the company have ever experienced. I commend the ORS and its team on what was a rigorous and thorough audit, as they painstakingly reviewed thousands and thousands of invoices and receipts going back to close to a decade. To be clear, the ORS did not review just a sample or a subset of invoices and receipts, but rather they literally went storm by storm, invoice by invoice. While it was a robust and rigorous undertaking and the discovery process was demanding, the ORS and the company's teams treated each other with respect and courtesy. And one of the main results of this extensive review was that the company had less than 0.5% error rate in assigning storm recovery costs. I am very proud of our team for their excellent work, but nonetheless, we are committed to use ORS's findings and recommendations to further improve our processes where applicable. After the opportunity for a full and detailed exploration of these costs, I am pleased with the fact that all parties in this proceeding were able to reach a stipulation covering most issues, greatly reducing the scope of contested issues before you today. Of note, included in the stipulation is an agreement to reduce the securitizable balance of storm recovery costs by approximately $50 million. This reduces the principal cost the company is seeking the Commission to approve as prudent storm recovery costs eligible for securitization from approximately $223 million to approximately $173 million. This is largely related to the company agreeing to accept a debt return instead of its weighted average cost of capital during the deferral period for these specific storms. The stipulation is the result of good faith negotiation and compromise among the parties. Given the unique nature and history of these deferred storm costs, the stipulation reasonably balances customer rate impacts with the company's ability to recover its expenses and at least a portion of its carrying costs. Accordingly, the company believes this stipulation represents a just and reasonable resolution of the most significant issues in this proceeding, is in the public interest, and should be approved by this commission without modification. Only 3 technical issues remain contested, which will be addressed by company witnesses Smith and Colbreth. While the witnesses will address each of the remaining issues in turn, I would simply ask this commission to consider each within the broader context of the company's request in its case, its accounting processes and systems, and the significant concessions already reflected in the stipulation. In conclusion, as you will see, the preponderance of the evidence clearly supports that the company prudently incurred these costs as a result of and in response to the 8 storms in question, and that the commission should therefore, 1, determine that the amount of storm restoration costs as modified by the stipulation are reasonable, prudent, and eligible for securitization, and 2, approve the accounting order for Izzy and Jasper as requested by the company. Thank you, Chair Belzer and members of the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Newport Steel, South Carolina.
No opening, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Department of Consumer Affairs.
No opening, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Mr. Huber or Mr. Knowles or Ms. Rainey.
Yes, Madam Chair. Madam Chair Belzer and members of the commission, this matter is one of the first impression before the commission under Act 227 of 2022. Duke Energy Progress seeks to review and approval of principal storm costs of approximately $223 million in its petition as a result of 8 named storms that took place over the span of almost a decade. Act 222 outlined 3 distinct phases in securitization proceeding process. Phase 1 is the prudence review of principal costs. Phase 2 is a review of the utilities petition for a financing order. And phase 3 is the post-financing order review in advance of issuance of bonds. This proceeding relates to phase 1 of the securitization process and addresses the prudence review of all underlying principal costs. In phase 1, the company has the burden to show that its requested principal storm costs were incurred in a prudent and reasonable manner. ORS reviews and audits those costs, all those underlying costs requested in the petition, performs its review, and presents its findings to the commission. The commission then must determine whether and to what extent the company's underlying principal costs requested in the petition are prudent and reasonable. In this proceeding, ORS and the company presented diverse positions, and all parties have distinct interests and viewpoints. However, in the spirit of compromise, all parties engaged in considerable negotiation, which resulted in all parties reaching a stipulation that resolved several major issues in this matter. ORS is charged with the responsibility of representing the public interest. That includes the needs of the using and consuming public as it relates to regulated public utility service. Overall, the stipulation results in a reduction of approximately $50 million compared to the company's petition, promotes judicial efficiency by narrowing the number of issues to litigate, and avoids costs and risks of appeal from a fully litigated proceeding. ORS respectfully submits that approval of the stipulation is in the public interest and recommends that the commission adopts the stipulation. Notably, the parties in the stipulation agree to a debt-only return as recommended by ORS on the underlying storm costs included in the petition that the commission ultimately deems as being prudently incurred. This term results in a reduction of approximately $40 million in deferred carrying costs compared to the petition. The reduction is offset by an increase of approximately $2.3 million as it relates to deferred carrying costs for the 2014 storms, which are Pax and Ulysses. The parties further agree to accept the recommendation of ORS witness Collin regarding the correct formula to use in the calculation of deferred carrying costs on deferred capital cost rate base for Hurricane Matthew distribution costs from January 2018 to May 2019. This term results in a reduction of over $3 million relative to the petition. As it relates to the costs associated with certain invoices for 9 named storms that were either assigned to South Carolina in error or were duplicates, the parties accept the recommendation of ORS witness Randy Futrell, which resulted in a reduction of approximately $40 million as compared to the company's petition. As I stated earlier, the stipulation does not address all issues in this matter. All unresolved issues will be addressed through submission of testimony and evidence and decided by this commission. The issues not addressed or resolved by the stipulation include correcting Matthew distribution and Florence distribution costs, modified accelerated cost recovery system, Makers ADIT, correcting average rate of prior month return. This unresolved issue focuses on whether to calculate deferred carrying costs on capital costs rate base and the regulatory asset based on the prior month balance or based on an average of the prior month and 1/2 of the current month. And lastly, excluding non-incremental costs from storm costs. This issue addresses whether it is appropriate to reduce storm costs for a non-incremental cost already recovered through rate base. In this proceeding, you will hear from ORS witnesses Mark Roden, Lane Collin, and Randy Futrell. Mr. Roden will speak to the scope and depth of ORS's review and why approval of the stipulation is in the public interest. Mr. Collin will discuss his review, which included the company's pre-planning and resource management process, the extent to which certain storms costs by the company are non-incremental, and deferred carrying costs on the storms claimed by the company. Mr. Collins' rebuttal addresses issues not resolved in the stipulation. Mr. Futrell will speak about ORS's audit and review of the company's petition, including all contracts and invoices, and provide recommendations on document retention. We appreciate the Commission's time and attention to this matter, and we look forward to presenting our case. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rainey. Duke, are you ready to present your witnesses?
Good morning, Commissioners. At this time, Duke Energy Progress calls Mr. Peter Ware to the stand.
Before you're seated, let me ask you to raise your right hand and let me administer the oath to you, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. Once you're seated, I'd ask that you state your name and spell your last name, please.
Peter J. Weir, W-E-H-R.
Mr. Ware, by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Duke Energy Progress as the Vice President of Operations for the Coastal Zone, and I am the Incident Commander for the Coastal Zone under the Incident Command Structure.
Thank you. And have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision direct testimony consisting of 47 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on August 8th, 2022 in this docket?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No.
And if I were to ask you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Here I am with the mic. I'm going to ask if you can pull that microphone a little bit closer so that everybody can hear you.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Thomas?
I think we have some handouts here that are slightly out of my reach that I think are for us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Ms. Athens.
Chairwoman Belser, at this time, I would move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Ware be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Ware's pre-filed direct testimony will be admitted into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Ware, turning to your rebuttal testimony, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision rebuttal testimony consisting of 7 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on February 7th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No.
And if I were to ask you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chairwoman Belser, at this time, I move that the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Ware be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Ware's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if testified to from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. Ware, have you prepared a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
Would you please deliver the summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony at this time to the Commission?
Yes. Good morning, Chairwoman Belser and members of the Commission. I provided direct and rebuttal testimony in this proceeding. In my direct testimony, I explained the company's Emergency Response Plan, or ERP, and recovery efforts related to storms Pax, Ulysses, Matthew, Florence, Michael, Dorian, Izzy, and Jasper, and support the company's request for review and approval of storm recovery principal costs incurred as a result of those response efforts. At a high level, the ERP is modeled after Homeland Security's incident command structure and ensures that the company is prepared in advance of major storms to quickly and safely remediate damage resulting from those storms to safely and reliably restore customer power. The ERP is built around 3 phases of storm restoration. First, pre-storm activation, then outage restoration, and then return of the system to normal operations. Pre-storm activation begins as early as 120 hours prior to the storm and includes detailed weather forecasting, modeling of damage and resource requirements, and preparation to support logistics needs. The outage restoration phase includes the operation activities following the impact from the storm that restore service to all customers capable of receiving it. The ERP identifies criteria for escalating event response based on impacts of a system threat. The ERP structure ensures rapid scalability, clear accountability, and effective coordination between internal departments and external organizations. The scalability of the ERP is reflected in the ERP's 3 distinct levels of restoration response, levels 1, 2, and 3. Once activated, the ERP establishes the Incident Management Team, or the IMT. The IMT includes a multitude of roles that facilitate an efficient response and restoration process. These roles are organized into 5 functional sections. Operations, which is focused on restoration of service. Planning, which identifies the number of resources by type that are needed. Logistics, which is responsible for acquiring the resources, such as labor, materials, damage assessment, crews, aviation, and crew housing, etc. Public Information Liaison, which is responsible for outreach and communication to customers, local emergency response centers, as well as state and local leaders. And Finance and Administration, which is focused on event cost forecasting, cost tracking and accounting, and HR-related issues. The storms giving rise to the costs in the petition were managed as Level 3 major storms due to their size and forecasted customer impacts, which means that these 5 functional sections were organized as an incident management team at a regional level. In each case, the company used storm modeling tools to predict the amount of damage to the system, where that damage will likely occur, and the amount of resources required to restore the projected outages. After the event passes, the company reruns the model based on actual weather outcomes. As outages are restored and more information is gathered through damage assessment, the accuracy of the model's results improves. The final phase of the company's restoration efforts ensures that the system is returned to its pre-storm status, with a primary focus on getting the lights on and safety considerations. Even after power is returned, there could be weeks of further activity to repair damage, and the company conducts both electrical and physical condition sweeps to identify any remaining issues. In some cases, the company must engage outside resources to carry out these storm restoration efforts as efficiently and as safely as possible. In those cases, the company maintains a detailed system for onboarding those resources and tracking costs associated with those resources. With respect to affected customers, the company communicates with customers during the entire process, both pre-storm and post-storm, through a variety of channels so that the customers know how to prepare, stay safe, and stay updated on the storm efforts. The ERP was activated at Level 3 for each of these 8 storms, which means these were very severe storms. Level 3 is our highest level. These are very severe storms, significant customer and system impacts. I'll describe each of the 8 storms here shortly. Again, we're doing Pax, Ulysses, Matthew, Florence, Michael, Dorian, Izzy, and Jasper, which are in the petition. So first, the February 2014 Winter Storm Pax was the most significant weather event to impact South Carolina at that time since Hurricane Hugo in '89. It affected nearly 300,000 customers, The company staged over 2,000 field personnel as the storm approached. However, unlike Hugo, a powerful storm that moved through quickly, the storm Pax in 2014 was actually several back-to-back events. The company mobilized for the storm February 11th, 2014, and completed restoration in 6 days. The DEP and DEC service areas were impacted by Winter Storm Ulysses, which produced snow, sleet, and freezing rain starting March 6, 2014, just a month after Pax. Freezing rain and elevated winds impeded restoration efforts until weather finally cleared on March 7th. The company deployed over 5,600 resources for this storm, which affected over 800,000 customers system-wide. The company mobilized for this storm on March 6, 2014, and completed restoration in 7 days. Hurricane Matthew was a big one, especially in the DEP area of South Carolina. Hurricane Matthew was considerable magnitude, caused damage in South Carolina and North Carolina to DEP's electrical system on a scale similar to Hurricane Hugo in '89. Hurricane Matthew was the 5th worst hurricane to hit the Carolinas in recorded history and affected over 1.4 million customers on a system-wide basis. As a result, the company ramped up resources and deployed more than 6,500 line restoration workers in the Carolinas, which included outside resources, some of which came from as far away as Canada, to assist. We mobilized for the storm on October 7th, 2016, completing restoration in 9 days. Hurricane Florence approached the Carolinas as a Category 4 storm with a projected inland path. In response, DEP and DEC mobilized an army of staff and crews of approximately 20,000 people, the largest in its history, to stage throughout the Carolinas to immediately deploy as soon as it was safe to begin restoration efforts. The storm made landfall September 14th near Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, and stalled before slowly moving across the Carolinas. In total, the storm impacted over 1.4 million customers in the Carolinas. To support these restoration efforts, the company provided housing and logistical support for more than 20,000 employees, allies, and contractors. We mobilized for the storm on September 10th, 2018, completing restoration in 11 days after landfall, but 80% were restored within 48 hours after the storm finally exited our territory. Hurricane Michael came ashore in the Florida Panhandle on October 10th, 2018, as a Category 4 storm with winds as high as 155 miles per hour. The storm was quick moving and reached the Carolinas as a tropical storm on October 11th, 2018, impacted almost 500,000 customers system-wide, and the company mobilized over 10,000 personnel, both native and non-native. We mobilized for the storm on October 11th, 2018, completing restoration in 7 days. On September 5th, 2019, slow-moving Hurricane Dorian impacted the Carolinas as a Category 2 storm, with maximum sustained winds of 90 miles per hour. The total number of DEP customers impacted during Hurricane Dorian was approximately 260,000 on a system-wide basis, and as a result of these restoration efforts, the company provided housing and logistical operations for almost 9,000 native and non-native resources. We mobilized for the storm on September 1st, 2019, and completed restoration in 4 days after Dorian finally made landfall. Winter Storm Izzy began over parts of North Dakota and western Michigan on January 13th of 2022 and began moving east, depositing 2 feet of snow in some areas. Izzy impacted almost 200,000 of the company's customers, and the company mobilized more than 9,000 native and non-native resources to begin restoration once conditions were safe. We mobilized for Izzy on January 15th, 2022, and completed restoration after 4 days. Finally, Winter Storm Jasper, right on the heels of Izzy, brought snow and ice to parts of the Carolinas all the way up to Virginia, as well as parts of the deep South Texas, northern Gulf Coast, including far west Florida. Winter Storm Jasper was a series of atmospheric disturbances that rode along a slowly progressing cold front that draped across the Gulf and Atlantic coast in late January. The forecast indicated that up to 60,000 customers could be affected, and the company mobilized around 2,500 line and tree workers. We mobilized for Jasper on January 19th, utilizing some of the resources already on the system for the ISI response. As it became clear that Jasper was not going to have the events of the magnitude previously forecast, we quickly began releasing resources with a full demobilization complete by January 22nd, 2022. Altogether, approximately 3,400 customers in South Carolina were impacted. Overall, the company's storm recovery activities related to the storms were prudent and resulted in the restoration of service to the vast majority of customers as quickly and as safely as reasonably possible, and the company's resulting costs were prudently incurred. The strength of the company's ERP is its flexibility to adapt to unexpected conditions. Each of these storms presented unique challenges. However, the ERP proved to be an effective and efficient tool to achieve our goal of restoring customer service as safely and expeditiously as possible. The ERP proved to be invaluable to us in preparing for and responding to these storms. I'm very proud of our extraordinary responses to each of these major storms. In my rebuttal testimony, I respond to certain recommendations proposed by the ORS related to the company's storm pre-planning and resource management. I explain that the company supports the ORS's recommendations and in some instances has already implemented such recommendations. DEP is committed to evolving and improving our pre-planning and resource management storm response process. For example, DEP continuously evaluates ways to improve its predictive resource modeling tools to ensure that the company can best prepare for and respond to storms. DEP also implements post-storm reviews and analytics. Additionally, DEP engages with affiliates and non-affiliates to learn and share best practices. While this is not an exhaustive list, it shows DEP's efforts and commitment to continuous improvement. The company continually seeks to implement enhancements to its predictive resource modeling tools. For example, the company has a plan in place to enhance the current Stormcaster resource model by incorporating a machine learning model to more accurately predict the resources required for storm restoration. As recommended by ORS, the company agrees to formally solicit feedback through periodic surveys of the storm response team, as well as continue to engage in a post-storm review assessment that includes detailed reporting and implementation of necessary improvements. Further, DEP will continue to look for ways to engage with non-affiliated utilities as recommended by the ORS. This concludes the summary of my direct and rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. Chairwoman Belser, at this time, Mr. Ware is available for cross-examination from other parties and questioning by the Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Athens. Newport Steel, South Carolina.
No questions, Madam Chair.
South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Office of Regulatory Staff.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Commissioners.
Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Weir, thank you for what you do, and certainly it is very important, something you should be proud of. So much of what I read of your testimony and things, and having been on the Coastal Council when Hurricane Hugo came through, I cannot compare anything to that. Having seen the damage, some people may not remember. I think most people here will. But you talk about the preparation system-wide, and we're concerned about South Carolina. What guarantees do we have that these calls, particularly putting people up, 20,000 people being provided care, et cetera, which I know is necessary, what assurances do we have that this is being equitably cost are coming to South Carolina as opposed to, I mean, I think one storm, Florence, came in North Carolina. This freeze was much more damaging in North Carolina. How can we be sure we're getting the right charge or the right amount of expense for this?
As part of the pre-planning phase, we issue storm charging that's detailed for each location where crews are assigned, where crews are working, and we utilize that based on where the crews are assigned and working. So that is tracked very closely throughout the event. Timesheets are checked each day from the crews that are working and signed by someone local and familiar with their work for that day. Witness Colbreth can speak deeper on the accounting and tracking of those costs.
Well, you reviewed it and you play an important part of it. Do you feel that what else is being presented to us is fair and equitable?
Yes, yeah, I was on the ground in Florence during Hurricane Matthew, personally signing timesheets for crews. I've seen the process work. I've participated in it. I'm confident in that review and that these costs are prudent and accurately charged with the minor corrections that were made.
Okay. It's kind of funny. Friends will ask me, particularly friends on the coast, how come they don't put the line underground after the pole comes down? And I know that's not a serious question, but thank you for all you do. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Thank you for being here and for participating in the broadening of our understanding. My question has to do with the relationship between these storms and FEMA disaster areas and whether those have any impact on the dollars or the needs that you as a company have. Does that make sense, or would you like me to ask it more specifically?
That makes sense, but that's outside my area of expertise, so maybe try the other witnesses.
Okay.
Potentially they have something there.
We've learned we need to ask you and then
Yes,
and then move
understand.
on.
Thank you.
And then my other question is, thinking particularly about Jasper and Izzy, already mobilized for one storm, does that make it more efficient to mobilize for the other, or is it tougher because you've got the resources out? Would you just speak to that in a general nature?
Yes, I was involved in those storms. It was a very difficult, challenging call because the one storm was coming. Jasper was coming right on the heels of Izzy, which we were working on. Several of those crews were down from the Midwest, working in the central to western half of the Carolinas, and it did not make sense to send them home. They would drive home, turn around, and come back based on the forecast that we would need those resources. So we wrestled with that. There was a couple days of lodging required while they waited for the storm. Essentially, that's a pre-deployment, which several of the hurricanes we pre-deploy as well. So we had them in place. We have models that predict how many crews you need based on the predicted weather, and that estimated how many crews we needed. We didn't have enough locally without that, so we kept them here. Turned out that storm wasn't as bad as anticipated, and we released them as quickly as possible.
So it sounds like and correct me if I misunderstood you, it sounds like there are some savings because you don't have to mobilize them, and there's some costs because you're paying for additional nights on the road.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to add to that?
Also, the crews, if you send them back to the Midwest and then drive them back again, they're less efficient. They're more tired, so it's better to have them rested if in this specific situation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ware. Commissioner Powers was asking about, are the costs appropriately allocated between the states? And my understanding is that you're with the Duke Energy parent company. Is that correct?
I'm with Duke Energy Progress, and my area of responsibility is entirely in the North Carolina coastal zone. So,
The North Carolina?
yes.
Okay. So I guess, all right, so we're talking about South Carolina, and you just said your responsibility is entirely in North Carolina.
Right. The geographic area that I'm responsible for is in North Carolina at this time. In the past, I've had roles like in Hurricane Matthew. I was responsible for contractors including all of DEP South Carolina. So I've had various roles throughout this decade of storms. But the costs are applied. We have a consistent method across all the Carolinas where we charge the costs according to specific charge codes that are specific to the operation centers that are in the DEP South Carolina or North Carolina, wherever the crews may be working, they charge to the appropriate charge codes, and the timesheets are signed off locally there.
Okay. But some of these storms have had impact on Duke Energy Progress as well as Duke Energy Carolinas. So I guess my concern would be we're dealing with the docket here is Duke Energy Progress, and to me it's just as important that the costs are correctly allocated between those two companies. Any comments on that?
I absolutely agree, and that's how our cost tracking is set up to track. We charge the costs that are specific to the crews supporting those areas, the lodging supporting those areas. It's charged to a charge code that's different in Florence, South Carolina than it is in Wilmington, North Carolina, than it is in Charlotte, North Carolina. They're different charge codes, so it's routing to the crews that are working in Florence, South Carolina are charging specifically to the Florence, South Carolina charging, and thus track that way.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So,
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it pronounced where or were?
it's weird.
Weir.
Yes.
3 guesses and I got it wrong, so I'm sorry. Mr. Weir, thank you very much. Scanning, at least the handout we had here, I was looking at the Hurricane Michael portion you have here. It just caught my eye, page 4. Talks about, you know, the storm hitting the Florida Panhandle. Overall, it impacted almost 500,000 customers system-wide. And I was wondering about that as far as the 500,000 system-wide. Is that system-wide in South Carolina, North Carolina? Is that Duke, Florida? I mean,
Typically, the numbers we're quoting as system-wide would be the Carolinas region. That's a misnomer,
Okay.
system-wide. Carolinas region is typically what we're quoting there.
So North and South Carolina. Any idea how much of that 500,000 was in South Carolina? Just out of
Yes.
curiosity.
I believe that's on my testimony. Let me check the chart.
And I apologize for the gruffness in my voice. It's pollen season.
I fully understand. I've been fighting it myself. On page 46 of my testimony, it has a chart that shows the DEP South Carolina impacted customers. And for Michael, 48,237.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And as I was thinking about these storms, listening to you describe the storms, the 5th worst, and these rankings, you know, I was curious, how is that done? Is that based on ranking the storms on wind speed, size of storm, speed of storm, or is that based on the economic damage or number of customers lost? I mean, how do you rank the storm? What's that ranking based on?
It's a great question. I don't know which metric was used in that ranking. In ranking that one 5th largest, I don't know which metric they chose.
Would anybody that's going to be testifying know? Just
Let me check the, may have some detail on it.
I mean, this isn't earth-shattering or anything. I'm just curious. That's okay. You don't have to worry about it. I'll ask later, and they'll either know or they won't.
Okay, thank you. I'll look in the meantime.
Because, you know, as I thought about that, you know, over the course of time since Hugo and storms before that and storms before recorded storms, you know, there are a few more people in the state, a lot more infrastructure, just a lot more stuff. So I was just curious.
Agreed.
That's really all I had. Thank you a lot, Mr. Weir. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Justin Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, sir, for being here today. I appreciate everything that you do for the service territory. It seems like you're during the course of those storms, you're right there on the front lines, and I know that's difficult, so I appreciate that. I value forward planning, anticipation, and looking over the horizon to be prepared, whatever may come. Are you tracking, or is your organization tracking the potential increase in storm damages to your system? Stated another way, if you look back the past 10 or maybe even 20 years, have you compared the storm damage occurred in that time frame based on the storm damage that has occurred in the last 2 to 3 years?
I have not seen a comparison showing the related damage. However, I think it's important to note our models are built, our storm predictive models are built to consider the damage from the past storms. So there's a several year history built of tropical storms that go into the tropical storm model. There's less years of ice and wind damage that goes into those models. But each time we have a major event, we update it, and the storm predictive models become smarter and more updated with what the new damage is, what the new improvements to our system are. If the storms are getting worse, it's built into that and predicts in a manner that's been updated since the last major event. So our predictive models are learning and predicting based on recent history as well as past history. But I have not personally seen a comparison showing that it's more damage or less, or the storms are worse or less than previous storms.
Okay, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your models project whether or not the storms are getting worse?
They predict how much damage we expect to have based on the forecast. So as it takes into account the most recent storm or the most recent storms, it's taking that into account to predict either more or less damage, whatever we had in the last event.
Okay.
And it takes it and the previous storms, so it's all packaged in there together. But if the damage from the storms are getting worse relative to the same area, it would be built into the models and predicting more.
So do you know, or is there anyone in your organization that knows or has a prediction for storm damage for the next 5 to 10 years? Or maybe even 15 to 20 years?
Not that I'm aware of. We have our weather meteorology team predicts a year ahead on terms of how many storms we expect to have and to what intensity, but we don't forecast damage a year out, 5, 10 years out in the future. We are working on storm hardening and improvements to our system. We're looking at devices, opening devices that have had the worst damage during the major storms, and looking at ways to improve beyond those to reduce the damage where it has been in the past, assuming that it will happen again in the future if it's happened multiple times in the past in those locations. But specifically to your question, I've not seen that, but we are working with an eye to the future to reduce damage and customer impacts and costs where economically appropriate.
Understood. And final question on this subject. So there's no one tracking the potential economic damage from potential climate change to your system?
Not that I'm personally aware of.
Okay. Several of my colleagues asked you questions about allocating costs between North and South Carolina. I believe everything that you're saying, so my questions are not to undermine or impeach what you're saying. I just need a little bit more help understanding the view on the system approach. When it comes to ensuring that costs are properly allocated, is it even remotely possible that a crew working somewhere in North Carolina would get charged to South Carolina? Is that even possible based on your accounting methods and how those charges are allocated?
It is remotely possible somebody could select the wrong charge code and put it in. It should be caught during the controls process as the timesheet reviewer is reviewing the timesheet. They should catch it there. It should also be caught as we proceed through. Witness Colbreth may be able to help in more detail in that realm, but I think from the ORS evaluation of our costs and how those were charged, some costs, very, very small, minute percentage was identified that should have gone to North Carolina, that did go to South Carolina, but very minimal compared to the overall. I think it was 1/2 of 1% that was found after a thorough review. So we do a lot of internal work to make sure that doesn't happen, but it is remotely possible.
Yes, sir. I understand. And you are the subject matter expert. I'm a novice, and you went over that pretty fast. So if you could just unpack for me that remote possibility of how it could happen, if you could just walk through that for me.
So if someone selects the wrong charge code,
Okay.
for
Who's that?
instance,
Who would that someone be?
a crew or a leader of a crew that
Okay.
that is assigned to a work or any employee that's assigned to a task has to select the charge code that they're going to charge to.
Okay. So if I'm a leader of a crew in North Carolina, I'm responsible for tracking the work of my crew and expensing it appropriately. Is that
Correct.
fair?
I receive charge codes for where I'm working. I select that and I charge my time to that code. Then there's a local approver that's aware of where they're working, what charge code they should be charging to, and they verify that it actually was worked, and they sign and the charge code's correct, and they approve the timesheet.
Okay. So under or in that scenario, what I'm hearing, the remote possibility would be human error as opposed to system error.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And that human error, if it were to occur, there's several lines of defenses to catch that error at some point internally with your organization.
Yes.
Okay. And in this case, the Office of Regulatory Staff went through, and I don't know how many times they checked, but they checked it to make sure that that error, that human error, if it did occur, they checked it to make sure that it was addressed appropriately. Is that fair to say?
Yes, that's my understanding. And Witness Colbreth is our expert in that accounting and tracking area.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Commissioners? Mr. Ware, good morning. You mentioned the term storm hardening. What are some of the processes that DEP is looking at to improve storm hardening on the system? If you know.
There are design codes, NESC design codes, grade B construction is stronger than our standard construction. It has a higher safety factor built into it, and it produces some storm hardening. The NESC 250 B to D are wind and ice charts that are more aggressive than the ones that we have used traditionally. So they're also more expensive to build the system that way. So again, we're focused on areas that have had a significant number of events at an opening device during our major events, and we look at those to improve. Would it benefit from these additional being rebuilt to a higher level, a higher code? We also pull some out of the if they're in a wooded area or a swampy area that's hard to get to and likely to have trees fall. Some of those are moved out to a less impactful area, with some expense to do that, of course. But we do that separate from the storm as part of our system upgrades and process to improve our system.
Okay. You mentioned a phrase when you were initially answering questions, and you just said it again, and it was opening devices or opening those devices.
Yes.
What is that?
Like a fuse or a
Okay.
switch, a smart switch that can tell if there's a limb on the line or a line down past it. It will open up, much like a circuit breaker in your home. It will open up, and those customers beyond that device will be out. So if that one typically goes out, that fuse opens, or that switch opens, that circuit breaker opens during a major storm event like the ones we're discussing here, and that's happened repeatedly. That's where we're looking and focusing our storm hardening efforts.
And y'all have a control room where you can see where those devices have opened, so to speak?
Yes, we have an outage management system that tracks as customers call in beyond those devices. We have a predictive modeling system that tells us which device is likely open. It may be a fuse, it may be a smart switch above that fuse. It determines how many customers and which customers we predict are out, and we go target restoration in that area.
Okay. But you also have to have people on the ground going through and looking at areas as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You, in your rebuttal, you discuss recommendations made by the Office of Regulatory Staff. Were there any recommendations that ORS made that Duke rejected?
No.
Okay, so y'all engaged in discussions to consider the recommendations made by the Office of Regulatory Staff?
Yes, in the rebuttal on the operational improvements, we did not object to any. We over the 10 years, we've made improvements in some of the areas pointed out. For example, we do, as part of our emergency response plan, we do after action reviews. We have a template we review across every impacted location and every supporting location. What went well, what didn't go well, and what we can do about it, and identify things to fix. They recommended that we do that. We agree. We were not able to provide evidence that we do that other than it's in the plan. We can improve our record keeping of what actions were suggested, what actions were taken, and what was specifically improved. We can do a more formal process, and based on their feedback, we've already started standing that up in a system where we can track it better and make sure things are completed to action, as an example. So we agree.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weir. Commissioners, any further questions for this witness? Hearing none. Ms. Athens, any redirect?
Mr. Ware, I believe you were asked some questions regarding future tracking of storm cost due to climate change. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I believe the question was also, do we predict more damage from the climate change?
And I know you stated that you weren't personally aware of that sort of cost tracking, but is it possible that the company may actually be doing some of that tracking, and perhaps witness Melissa Colbreth could answer that question?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Weir, I think that concludes your presentation this morning. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next witnesses will be calling as a panel, and Duke Energy Progress at this time would call Melissa Colbreth and Kim Smith.
Oh, I apologize. Falling asleep at the switch.
I'm Kim Smith.
Both raise your right hand, please. State your name for me.
Kim Smith. Melissa Colbert.
And do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. May be seated. I'm going to ask you to Well, Mr. Cooper may do this, but I'm gonna ask you to each state your name and spell your last name, even though one of them's pretty easy.
Thank goodness, right?
Madam Chair, can are there copies for the parties? I don't know, was that just the summaries that were handed
The
out?
summaries, are there summaries that? Do you have enough? You can have them. Do you have enough?
Thank you.
State your name for me, please.
Kim Smith, last name spelled Smith.
And Ms. Culberth,
Melissa?
you're on. Just pull it toward you, if you can.
Melissa Colbreth, last name is spelled Culbreth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Colbert, just for purposes of the record, we'll start with you first. For purposes of the record, even though I know you just went through this, would you please just state your name and by whom you were employed in what capacity?
My name is Melissa Colbreth. I'm employed by Duke Energy Business Services, and my title is Director of Business Support in Financial Planning and Analysis.
Thank you. If you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision direct testimony of 15 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on August 8th in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
And if I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision two exhibits to your direct testimony labeled as Colbreth Exhibit 1 and Colbreth Exhibit 2 that were previously filed with the Commission as an attachment to your pre-filed direct testimony in this docket?
Yes.
And do you have any changes or additions to your exhibits?
No.
Okay. Madam Chair, at this time, I move that the pre-filed direct testimony and exhibits of Ms. Colbreth be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Culberth's pre-filed direct testimony will be admitted into the record as if given from the stand, and Ms. Culberth's exhibits 1 and 2 attached to her direct testimony will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 2 and received into the record of this case.
Thank you. Ms. Colbreth, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision supplemental direct testimony of 4 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on January 20th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed supplemental testimony?
No.
And if I ask you those same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision 2 exhibits to your supplemental testimony labeled as Colbreth Supplemental Exhibit 1 and Colbreth Supplemental Exhibit 2 that were previously filed with the Commission as an attachment to your pre-filed supplemental direct testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibits?
No.
Okay. Madam Chair, at this time, I move that the pre-filed supplemental direct testimony and exhibits of Ms. Colbreth be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Culberth's supplemental direct testimony will be admitted as if given orally from the stand. I note that I have a question about her exhibits. I don't think they were designated as supplemental. I didn't see the word supplemental on those that I was given. So, but the exhibits 1 and 2 attached to her supplemental testimony will be admitted, marked for identification as hearing exhibit 3 and received into the record of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Colbreth, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision rebuttal testimony of 12 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on February 7th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No.
And if I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision 2 exhibits to your rebuttal testimony labeled as Colbreth Rebuttal Exhibit 1 and Colbreth Rebuttal Exhibit 2 that were previously filed with the Commission as attachments to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibits?
No.
Madam Chair, at this time I move that the pre-filed rebuttal testimony and exhibits of Ms. Colbreth be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Culbert's pre-filed rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. Ms. Culbert's exhibits noted Culberth Rebuttal Exhibit 1 and 2 will be marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 4 and admitted into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Ms. Culberth, have you prepared a summary of your direct, supplemental direct, and rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please deliver that summary at this time?
Yes. Good morning, Chairwoman Belser and members of the Commission. I submitted direct, supplemental, and rebuttal testimony in this proceeding. The purpose of my direct testimony is to support DEP's request for review and approval of principal costs related to storm recovery activities following the major storms Pax, Ulysses, Matthew, Florence, Michael, Dorian, Izzy, and Jasper. Specifically, my testimony supports the company's incremental operations and maintenance and capital costs incurred as a result of the storms and describes the internal processes utilized by DEP to ensure proper accounting, review, and validation of the incremental O&M and capital costs for the storms. When a potential major storm event is approaching the DEP service territory, the Finance and Administration Functional section of the Incident Command Structure creates separate project codes for each business function to be used by employees for processing and aggregating the total amount of storm restoration costs incurred for financial reporting and regulatory recovery purposes. The company uses these project codes to account for all costs directly associated with storm recovery activities, including incremental and non-incremental costs. These codes accumulate costs for each business function, such as transmission, distribution, customer operations, fossil hydro generation, that are involved during storm restoration. The company defines incremental costs as all costs incurred to respond to storms arising from 1, the engagement of external resources to DEP, 2, the overtime pay of DEP employees, and 3, the materials for repairs. The company considers non-incremental costs, such as base labor for DEP employees, to be part of DEP's base revenue requirement and therefore already recovered in customer rates. The company breaks the incremental O&M costs into the following categories. 1 is company labor, 2 is our contract labor cost, 3, vegetation management labor cost, 4, materials and supplies, 5, internal fleet costs, and 6, other expenses. Incremental capital costs for these storms are costs for the replacement of distribution and transmission assets, such as poles, towers, transformers, and wire that would not have otherwise been repaired or replaced were it not for the damage caused by the storms. The company has a process to ensure all units of property removed, retired, or replaced during storm recovery activities are properly accounted for. For transmission operations, given the much smaller number of individual repair and replace events, specific projects were issued for capital versus O&M work, allowing real-time tracking of these capital projects. As capital work was performed, the associated labor, material, and equipment costs were charged to capital projects. With respect to distribution operations, given that time is of the essence and the nature of repair work is so voluminous, the use of separate individual projects for capital versus O&M work is not feasible. However, the company's tracking of materials allows it to accurately account for all units of property removed and installed during storm recovery activities, resulting in the proper capitalization of those units of property.
Ms. Culberth, I apologize for interrupting, but I'm getting a message from the back that if you could get closer to that microphone or pull it a little closer, it would be helpful. And I apologize.
No problem. Thank you. The company's incremental O&M and capital costs are reasonable and necessary to restore service to customers and provide for safety, resiliency, and continuity of DEP's system. Each of the named storms caused extensive damage and widespread outages. This response involved the activation and deployment of storm response resources internal to the company, utilization of outside contractors, and the need to seek mutual aid from other electric utilities and allies in the industry. These incremental costs were prudently incurred as a result of storm recovery activities and should be approved as eligible for recovery pursuant to Act 227. In my supplemental testimony, I present updates to storm cost estimates for Izzy and Jasper that were finalized after I submitted my direct testimony. In my rebuttal testimony, I respond to certain adjustments proposed by the ORS. ORS Adjustment 2A recommends that the company exclude certain invoicing errors for Florence, Michael, Dorian, and Jasper. The company reviewed those invoices identified, and after conducting its review, the company agrees that these limited invoices were misapplied to South Carolina. The company is always committed to evolving and improving its processes, including the retention and organization of supporting documentation, and the company agrees with the recommendation related to this adjustment and addressed this in the stipulation filed in this docket. In fact, the company has already begun to implement certain of these recommendations, including electronically storing invoices related to storm restoration activities, and will implement the recommended organization structure of those documents. However, the company disagrees with the ORS's recommendation 2B to exclude certain storm recovery costs that it views as non-incremental. Those costs are properly included in the principal costs that the company seeks to recover because they are incremental, meaning that they are not reflected in base rates and would not have been incurred absent these extraordinary storms. It is important to understand that the company recovers through base rates amounts for normal Native employee overtime and normal Native contract resources costs. The amounts set in rates are based on Native employee overtime and Native contractor cost in a historical test period. The company considers those to be non-incremental costs. However, those test period amounts do not include overtime for DEP employees or contractor costs for restoration activities associated with extraordinary storms. Therefore, the company considers those to be incremental costs. The company considers all contractor, both native and non-native time spent performing storm restoration activities as incremental. This is because the company has contracts with these native vendors to complete their normal work. The costs to perform the work under these contracts are reflected in base rates and are therefore non-incremental. However, when a major storm hits, these contractors transition to perform storm restoration activities for as long as they are needed. The costs the company incurs for this transition to storm restoration activities are paid for separately and are therefore incremental. Once the storm restoration work is complete, the contractors still have the obligation to complete that normal work under pre-existing contracts reflected in base rates, so there is no double recovery. For DEP employees, the company only considers overtime of its employees spent on storm restoration activities as incremental. Incremental costs are separate and distinct from contractors and employees' normal assigned work and would not have been incurred absent the storm. I believe the company has a credible and sound definition of incremental cost. Even with the incremental cost deferred, the company still faces increased O&M compared to normal as a result of the storm because the native base labor is often charging O&M for storm restoration when they would normally be charging capital projects. This results in increased O&M for the company, which is not deferred and for which the company is not seeking recovery. I think this is important to state clearly here today that there is no double recovery of these costs. This concludes the summary of my direct, supplemental, and rebuttal testimony.
Thank you. And Ms. Smith, I know that you stated your name and spelled your name earlier, but for clarity of the record and to gain us favor with the court reporter, I'd ask if you would please state your name and by whom you were employed in what capacity.
Yes, my name is Kim K. Smith. I'm employed by Duke Energy Carolinas, testifying today on behalf of Duke Energy Progress.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision direct testimony of 13 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on August 8, 2022 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
And if I asked you those same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision one exhibit to your direct testimony labeled as Smith Exhibit 1 that was previously filed with the Commission as an attachment to your pre-filed direct testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibit?
I do not.
Madam Chair, at this time I move that the pre-filed direct testimony and exhibit of Ms. Smith be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Smith's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand, and Smith Exhibit 1, which was attached or filed with her direct testimony, will be marked as hearing exhibit number 5 and received into the evidence of this case. And may I ask a question? I think the exhibit indicated Exhibit 1 in work papers, so the work papers are part of Exhibit 1. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Smith, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision supplemental direct testimony of 4 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on January 20th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed direct supplemental testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision one exhibit to your supplemental testimony labeled as Smith Supplemental Exhibit 1 that was previously filed with the Commission as an attachment to your pre-filed supplemental testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibit?
No, I do not.
Okay. Madam Chair, at this time, I move that the pre-filed supplemental testimony and exhibit of Ms. Smith be admitted into evidence as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Smith's supplemental direct pre-filed testimony will be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand, and the supplemental Exhibit 1 that was attached to her supplemental direct testimony will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 6 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision rebuttal testimony of 12 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on February 7th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision one rebuttal exhibit labeled as Smith Rebuttal Exhibit 1 that was previously filed with the Commission as an attachment to your pre-filed rebuttal testimony in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your exhibit?
No, I do not.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed rebuttal testimony and exhibit of Ms. Smith be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Smith's rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. Ms. Smith's rebuttal Exhibit 1 will be marked as hearing exhibit number 7 and received into the record of this case.
And Ms. Smith, have you prepared or caused to be prepared under your supervision second supplemental testimony of 9 pages that was previously filed with the Commission on February 10th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or additions to your pre-filed second supplemental testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you those questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, at this time, I move that the pre-filed second supplemental testimony of Ms. Smith be admitted into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Smith's second supplemental direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Smith, have you prepared a summary of direct supplemental rebuttal and second supplemental testimony?
I have.
Okay. Would you please deliver that summary at this time?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. In this proceeding, I submitted direct, 2 sets of supplemental, and rebuttal testimony. In my direct testimony, I provide a brief overview of the securitization process within South Carolina Act 227 and provide support for the deferred balance or principal costs that the company incurred or expects to incur as a result of certain winter storms and hurricanes. Act 227 permits the company to securitize certain prudently incurred storm recovery costs over the course of 3 distinct procedural phases. In Phase 1, the company must present to the Commission for review and approval the principal costs it proposes to securitize. If those costs are approved, the company may then initiate Phase 2 by filing a petition for a financing order requesting recovery of the approved costs through the issuance of storm recovery bonds. Once approved, the company will proceed with Phase 3 by issuing bonds and implementing a storm recovery charge once accepted by the Commission. In Phase 1 of this proceeding, the company seeks review and approval of the principal costs that the company incurred as a result of the following storms: Pax, Ulysses, Matthew, Florence, Michael, Dorian, Izzy, and Jasper. The company is also seeking an accounting order for deferral of certain costs associated with winter storms Izzy and Jasper. This will allow the company to include the cost for Izzy and Jasper in this proceeding and to pass along securitization benefits to customers. These costs qualify as storm recovery costs under Act 227 because they were incurred or expected to be incurred as a result of the storm recovery activities arising from the storms I mentioned earlier. In total, the total projected deferred costs for the company originally proposed to securitize was approximately $223 million. These principal costs fall within 3 primary categories: deferred incremental O&M expenses, deferred capital costs related to Hurricanes Matthew and Florence, and carrying costs on the deferred costs incurred or to be incurred in connection with the storms. It is important to note that the carrying costs have been projected through February 2024, the expected issuance date of the storm recovery bonds. Although several of the storms are several years old, the Commission previously granted deferrals related to these storms so that the company could explore alternative, lower-cost recovery mechanisms. Act 227 now allows the company to pursue securitization, which offers lower-cost recovery for customers. Based on current market conditions, the company expects to achieve quantifiable customer benefits as compared to traditional cost recovery mechanisms. In my supplemental direct testimony, I provide final amounts for the storm recovery costs related to storms Izzy and Jasper. These updates did not materially impact the amount of the principal costs included in the company's petition. In my rebuttal testimony, I provide an overview of the ORS recommendations and support the stipulation reached by the company, the ORS, Department of Consumer Affairs, and Nucor Steel. The company provided thousands of invoices and supporting documentation in response to the ORS's audit, resulting in the most intensive and extensive audit for a subset of costs that either the company or Duke Energy Carolinas has experienced by the ORS. The ORS recognized the company's diligent efforts to be as responsive as possible during the audit, and the company appreciates the collaboration and transparency achieved by both parties. As a result of the audit, the ORS proposed 7 main accounting and rate-making adjustments. Through continued collaboration and negotiation, the parties were able to reach agreements on certain of these proposed adjustments, which are memorialized by the stipulation. Although the stipulation does not address all unresolved issues in this case, it significantly narrows the contested issues before the Commission and represents good faith negotiation and compromises made by all parties on the most significant issues in this proceeding. As a result of the stipulation, the company's projected balance to securitize is reduced by approximately $50 million and is now estimated to be approximately $173 million at the expected bond issuance date of February 2024. The remaining unresolved issues relate to ORS Adjustment 1A, ORS Adjustment 1C, and ORS Adjustment 2B. The company disagrees with the ORS's calculation of Adjustment 1A and 1C as errors and simply believes these ORS recommendations represent a difference in methodology or approach. The company believes Adjustment 1A recommended by the ORS is a more detailed approach, but also believes the entirety of all tax impacts have not been considered, and therefore, while the ORS calculation is more detailed, the company does not believe it is more accurate. The company relies on a higher level model to calculate carrying charges for deferrals, and the company's position is that the overall calculation of carrying costs is fair, reasonable, and consistent with the company's typical process for estimating carrying costs in regulatory proceedings. In ORS Adjustment 1C, the ORS recommends that carrying costs be based upon the rate base at the end of the prior month and not an average of prior month and current month rate base, which the company assumed. This approach is problematic because it assumes that all costs happen on the last day of the month, when in reality, costs are incurred throughout the month. The company's approach of using the average of the prior month rate base and the current month rate base is the most realistic way to approximate the average daily balance throughout the month on which a return should be calculated. The final unresolved ORS adjustment, proposed adjustment 2B, suggests that certain costs related to native employee and contractor resources be viewed as non-incremental costs and thereby be excluded from the principal costs recoverable by the company. However, the company believes that these costs should be included because the company has properly defined incremental versus non-incremental costs in its storm reporting process. Finally, in my second supplemental testimony, I addressed the 8 considerations listed in the Commission's order issued on December 15, 2022, in docket number 2019-233-A, related to the request to defer costs related to storms Izzy and Jasper. In my testimony, I stepped through each of the 8 guidelines presented by the Commission and demonstrate the company's compliance with those guidelines with respect to the deferral request for Izzy and Jasper. In addition to those 8 guidelines, the order also instructs utilities requesting a deferral to include an estimated impact on revenue and rates and include a cost-benefit analysis resulting from the request, while also evaluating the effects of a deferral compared to recovery through alternate means. I provide testimony responsive to this request as well and highlight that Izzy and Jasper costs represent approximately 4.1% of the overall securitizable balance to be financed with storm recovery bonds. The company will provide the remaining information, which include rate and revenue impacts and a cost-benefit analysis in Phase 2 of this proceeding. This concludes the summary of my direct, supplemental, and rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Madam Chair, at this time, Ms. Colbreth and Ms. Smith are available for cross-examination and from other parties and questions by the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. We've been going about an hour and a half, and I need to give the court reporter a little break. So it is 11:33. Let's return in 10 minutes, 12 minutes at 11:45, please. Thank you. We're on recess. Good morning. Welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We are in the hearing in docket number 2022-256-E related to Duke Energy Progress's request for storm cost recovery. Let's take a roll call of commissioners as we come back from the break. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin, and present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Jay Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. Mr. Cooper?
Chair Belser, just one moment, just a quick clarification, if I may. There was a commissioner question of the last witness, and we can quickly address that question and offer in a late filed exhibit if that would help the commission. The question specifically related to how do we assess the rankings of the hurricanes? And the answer is it's part of the peak power, it's based on peak power outages, and we just wanted to, it's just a quick clarification, but if it would be helpful to put that in a late filed exhibit, we just wanted to clarify that question.
Commissioner Williams, I think that was your question, was it not? No, Commissioner Caston, do you want to exhibit or does that clarify?
I will never say no to an exhibit if you want to include that. I will probably pursue a little further, maybe I'll ask a question or two, but if that's fine with me, Madam Chair.
Is there any objection to a late filed exhibit to respond to that question from Commissioner Caston? Hearing none, we'll reserve hearing exhibit number 8 for a late filed exhibit.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I believe you tendered the witnesses. You've tendered the witnesses.
Chair Belser, the witnesses have been tendered.
Thank you.
Please answer any questions, cross-examination or commissioner questions.
Thank you. Newcore Steel, South Carolina.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Department of Consumer Affairs.
No cross for the department, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. Knowles.
All right. Good morning, Ms. Smith, Ms. Colbreth. How are y'all doing today?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Ms. Smith, my questions will be for Ms. Colbreth, and Ms. Colbreth, I don't have that very many for you. So I'd like to talk with you about incremental versus non-incremental costs. In this proceeding, the company is requesting costs incurred for native contractors to perform storm restoration work, correct?
Correct.
And I believe you testified in your summary that the company considers all contractors, native and non-native, all the time they spend performing storm restoration activities to be incremental.
That is correct.
And I'm sure that you're aware that ORS has asserted that some costs incurred by native contractors to perform storm restoration work are non-incremental costs. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of the ORS's adjustment for the non-incremental costs associated with native contractors.
Okay. And the company's position on this issue is that all of the costs that it has requested for storm restoration work performed by native contractors are definitionally incremental costs. Would that be a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
Okay. As a result, the company did not perform quantitative analysis of what portion of the storm recovery costs attributable to work performed by native contractors was non-incremental. That's also correct.
The company relies on its definition of incremental costs as the calculation for incremental cost of native contractors. We define that as any costs performed by our contractors above their normal work activities. So a level 3 storm is not considered normal in our service territory. It's not part of our base work plan. Therefore, the cost associated with restoring power of our customers is not in our base and therefore considered incremental costs.
So are you saying that DEP did provide a quantitative analysis of the non-incremental costs attributable to native contractors in this proceeding?
I'm not sure, don't quite understand your definition of a quantitative analysis. I'm relying on the fact that our calculation and definition is the analysis that. we
Oh,
do to
I
support.
see. And definitionally, the answer from Duke's perspective is there are no non-incremental costs from native contractors.
That's correct.
And Ms. Culbreth, you would agree that ORS witness Colin and yourself have different understandings of what constitutes an incremental cost. Would that be fair?
I do believe we have a different methodology for determining that
Okay.
incremental cost.
And based on ORS witness Colin's understanding of what constitutes an incremental cost, witness Colin presented a quantitative analysis of what portion of the company's native contractor costs he believed to be incremental. Correct?
Correct. He presented an analysis.
Okay. A quantitative analysis?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Culbreth.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Commissioners, questions for this panel? Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. Good morning. Still morning a little bit.
Good morning.
I'm not going to direct my questions specifically to either one of you. I'll just let you kind of take it as you see fit, if that's okay.
Yeah, that will work.
All right. So basically, we're looking at carrying cost estimated at about $28 million going out through February of 2024. The carrying cost that's been applied and added to the storm costs for recovery. And that represents about 16% of the overall cost. And it just seems like that's a pretty big number in the whole scheme of things. And some of these costs have been obviously hanging out there for a very long time. And you've had other methodologies that potentially you could pursue to recover these costs. And I guess what I'd like to hear a little bit is what were some of the other methodologies that you could have used. And, the Act 227 wasn't passed until back in the summertime. So what was the thinking behind postponing these costs for so long?
So, Commissioner, I can talk to you about that. We recognize that this grouping of 8 storms with these type of dollar amounts is atypical. We're hoping this never happens again. But I can walk you through kind of the regulatory history of all the storms and how we got here. I will say just up front that a lot of the earlier storms, we set them aside as customer mitigants so that customers wouldn't have to pay those costs yet. And as securitization came more into the forefront, more jurisdictions were adopting it, it became clear that we were probably going to get to this down the road and we would get to Act 227. So I would say, the 14 storms and then Hurricane Matthew in 16 were both set aside in rate cases as customer mitigants. And then once Florence and Michael and then Dorian just a year later rolled into our territory, those were super extraordinary storms and just added to this balance. So we did accrue carrying charges over time per the commission orders. And then with the stipulation, we also agreed with the ORS and other settling parties that we would forego a portion of that return in the for customer benefits, and just acknowledging the extraordinary nature of the storms and the fact that they've been deferred, some of them for almost a decade.
Okay, and so part of the settlement was going with just the debt cost as opposed to the overall cost of capital. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, so in the stipulation, you'll note, I stated it, and I think Mr. Robinson stated it as well. We had a $50 million reduction in the securitizable balance, and so 43 million of that was us foregoing the equity return that we had accrued over the years.
Okay. And on a go-forward basis, do you believe that the debt only is a fair way to go if we get into doing this again in the future?
I will say the stipulation that stipulated this was only for this particular issue. You know, the debt return represents right now, based on the extraordinary nature of these storms, a balance of our needs so that we can still recover a portion of our carrying costs over those years, and customers get the benefit of not having to pay the equity return.
Okay. And I believe you had some discussion in connection with the accelerated tax depreciation, impacts of bonus depreciation, and basically that you included some, but you didn't include all, and you didn't include the modified accelerated cost recovery impacts in the deferred tax balance. So it's correct that you included some of the benefits, but not all?
I would say yes, we included the most material benefit, which was the bonus depreciation for Hurricane Matthew, which was still applicable in our tax laws at that time with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That went away, so it didn't apply to Hurricane Florence, which is the other storm in question. We did not take the deduction for makers, but we also did not account for any of the net operating losses for the company that would have, you know, basically offset some of that reduction that we gave to customers up front. I'm going to go on record and say I'm not a tax expert. I understand in the context of this hearing how the tax impacts for ADIT impact my deferral schedules, but all the ins and outs of how the taxes work and that sort of thing is a little bit outside of my subject matter expert area.
Well, I did have a couple of questions along those lines, but I guess I will just pass on that. So let's see. And regarding the incremental and non-incremental issue that we're just discussing, I'm kind of having a hard time understanding that. I mean, you do have overtime for your regular contractor costs through the rates. Is that correct?
It is in our base rate revenue requirement. We do include overtime costs for DEP employees and cost of our native contractors to perform their normal work plan. As you've heard today, these level 3 storms are extraordinary, and when they do impact our service territory, all of our resources are diverted to help with storm restoration. It's an all hands on deck situation. So those contractors particularly are pulled from their normal work. I'll give an example. Our vegetation management crews, the majority of their costs are O&M costs. In fact, approximately 80% of the cost we have in base revenues are related to our veg trimming plan. The vegetation management, performs their work on a cyclical basis. That over a number of years. Well, that result creates an annual work plan for our vegetation management crews. So they're working their plan. When a storm hits our service territory, they're pulled from that normal work plan to go help remove trees or limbs from our lines so that we can restore power to our customers. When storm restoration is complete, they return to that work plan, and they still have to complete that within a reasonable period of time so that we stay on track with our requirements and our commitments on the annual trim cycle. So therefore, their costs we deem incremental. They would not have been incurred absent the storm, and they still have to complete their regularly or their assigned work plan under the contracts we have with them.
So can you give me assurance that they're not being double recovered, those costs in regular base rates, and put aside and recovered in this proceeding?
Yes, sir. Witness Weir mentioned project codes we set up. We set up unique project IDs at the beginning of the storm. Those are presented to all of our personnel, employees, and contractors, and they allow us to capture the storm-related costs in that unique accounting while our resources continue to use their normal accounting instructions for their normal work. So those storm costs are isolated in those codes.
Okay. All right, I think that's all I have for right now.
Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon now.
Good afternoon.
Listening to that last part in response to that question. So am I understanding you to say, as far as the contractors, that does Duke not figure in their budget for contractors any overtime?
So the treatment for employees, overtime, and contractors is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So our contractor cost are rates agreed to in their contracts. We don't differentiate overtime for contractors. It's based on our rates agreed to. For employees, we do differentiate their cost in storms. Their base labor, so their straight time cost for our employees, is in base rates based on the split of their work. And I'll mention that 5% of our DEP employee cost is O&M cost. The majority of their time is spent on capital. Therefore, when they incur overtime, the majority of that is capital as well. So again, our Duke employees do not have much overtime in O&M space. So when they're diverted for storms and they're working 14 to 16 hours a day as opposed to a straight time rate, we consider those costs to be incremental.
Okay, I think I understand that. You have budgeted OT and everything for staff, but for contractors, it's the contract, whether it's lump sum or whatever it is, and you probably have some provision if it goes over, I'm not sure. But with that in mind, when Duke considers, I guess, their budget for contractors, do they figure the contractor working exclusively on whether it's 80% vegetative management, I think you said, 20% on something else, and you simply figure that? Does Duke consider, well, we may need these contractors for other things, other storms and such? Is that worked into the budget, or is it just an annual contract and the contractor I'm assuming the contractor would include that in his cost if Duke requested that he include that in his cost. Does that occur?
Let me know if I answer your question, but I'll try to explain.
That was confusing. I apologize.
Okay. No, that's okay. So we have contracts established with our native contractors, and it's important to have those native contractors on our system. They're familiar with our standards, our construction methods, our system in general. So it's very helpful to the company and in our storm response that we have native contractors that we can divert to help during storms. We have contracts with rates. I'll be honest, I'm not a contracting specialist either, but my understanding is we have sometimes our rates are based on units of work completed. We have time and equipment rates, and there's clauses in these contracts for storm support. And sometimes those are, know the definition, all the different rates structures, but there are different rates for storm support.
I understand.
Does that answer your question?
I think as well as could be expected. I mean, it's not your fault, it's mine.
Okay.
I just phrased that poorly, but yes, ma'am, that was good enough. And what I was thinking is, you know, certainly the budgets I was familiar with are nothing like Duke's budgets. Well, they may be, but on a much smaller scale. And generally, you know, what we do is maybe look back over the previous 5 years, and you know, we had storms affected us also at where I used to work. So we had all those things. We also had contractors. We had similar things, I would imagine. But we kind of look over that historical time period and assume that, you know, if it happened before, it's probably going to happen again. And does Duke do anything similar to that as they work on budgets looking ahead?
Yes, sir. Yes, I can help you with budgeting. I do that a lot. So our process is similar to what you described. We do look at historical cost, and we look at what's typical. What's the normal work activities? There's going to be storms. We all experience summer thunderstorms. So yes, those types of things are built into our budget. But these level 3 extraordinary storms don't occur every year, and none of us want to plan for them. So we don't plan for anything of this extraordinary nature. There is budget allotted for restoration activities, but none that reach this level. So the company has in its typical plan, what I would say is a normal storm year, but in the case of these 8 storms, they were well over and above those costs.
Based on the time frame you looked at or what you budget from?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Because along those lines, I was thinking, and I think Attorney Cooper said they were going to be submitting an exhibit that looks at storms. And I think, I'm not sure, I think I recall Ms. Athens seemed like made a statement that, you know, relative to storms or somehow your name got mentioned that, you know, you would probably have information on that. Whether you do or don't, I don't know, but I'll probably ask you a question or two on that if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. As I think about storms, and I've heard, let's see, can't find the exact verbiage. Extraordinary nature of these storms, and I don't doubt it, mind you. The little storm that I was in when I was at Clemson a few years back, you know, it wasn't that big by tornado storms, but when it goes over your head, it's big. So as I think about these things and think about how you rank storms, or this was extraordinary, I tend to think in time frames. You know, what time frame are we talking about? A 30-year period, a 20-year period, and does the 20-year start here, go back to here? Is it a 30-year period? Because, you know, I've personally observed, you know, even when you look at rainfalls, for example, over the last 100 years, how that has changed depending on the time period you use. And that has nothing to do with this, except if these are extraordinary, and they may be, well may be, I mean, you said they were, and Duke normally doesn't plan for these, but if you looked at a 30-year cycle or a 20-year cycle, would similar things have occurred? And depending on how the storms are ranked or rated, what does that? Is that, like I say, the wind speed, the size of the storm, or is it the economic factor, or the number of customers out, or maybe even the percentage of customers out, because as your customer base grows, it might be more customers, but the percentage is less. Does that make sense? So I guess what I'm wondering, because I've heard that a lot, not disputing it at all, but is there a way, or has Duke considered, say, recorded storms? I've heard recorded storms mentioned. I don't know how far back that goes. I truly don't. But let's say the last 100 years. If we looked at all the recorded storms over the last 100 years, and we applied today's numbers, today's populations, today's present value of dollars, money. And I suspect you won't be able to answer this question. I know I couldn't. Would those storms be any worse, less, equal to? Do you know?
No, I do not know.
So, and I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Because that is something I'm thinking about, and, you know, I'm not saying it concerns me, but we often hear things like there's more storms or they're worse. That it may or may not be true. But all things equal, perhaps we should kind of look back over time, apply equal things. And it's okay to say, you know what, we had a bunch of storms in the last 9 years. They were bad. But 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 80 years ago, we may have had real bad storms then too. And if you put the same thing on, they may have been worse than today. So, I say all that to say, let's make sure we've got the cost covered accurately and well. But it might be good not to just look at narrow time frames. Does that make sense?
I understand.
So maybe going forward, we might want to think about doing those kind of things.
Okay.
Doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. It's okay to do it differently. If it maybe provides better information. Just a thought.
Understand.
I don't know if this is you or Ms. Smith. I'll throw it out there and anybody answer who wants to. Are you both reasonably familiar with Act 227? Have you read it?
I would say reasonably, yes.
Reasonably.
Painful read, isn't it? Section 5827, 1110, I think paragraph A8, it caught my attention when I read it, where it talks about direct testimony, exhibits, and supporting work papers, supporting the position or petition, and some other verbiage. I'll let you get there. It's 5827, 1110, A8.
Do you mind repeating that?
Section, it's 1110, A8. I'd give you the page, but they're probably different numbers. And if you don't find it, it's okay, because I'm not going to ask you a legal question or anything like that.
I think we found it.
We're on it.
When I read that, and as I read the act in general, at least to me, the act seems to have a significant focus on the commission assuring that if securitization occurs, that the customer is receiving the lowest cost possible. I mean, that's, I think, kind of what it says. And as I look at that section, it was at least kind of unique to me, and it may not be in other legislation, but it specifically says that direct testimony, exhibits, and supporting work papers supporting the petition. And as I looked at, I think it was yours, Ms. Smith, the exhibits, real small print on my copy, but it wasn't your fault. it had a table balanced by storm, and then you had one balanced by function, you know, where that was distribution.
Yes.
And which I thought was good tables, by the way, very good.
Thank you.
But my first thought was when I looked at those numbers, I thought, where'd that number come from? So when I looked at A8, thinking about that, like supporting work papers, you know, I don't normally see that. But I was thinking, I don't know if I got my supporting work papers.
Okay.
Did I?
I think there were supporting work papers provided that back those numbers up. Those tables represent, the first line in those tables represents all the incremental O&M costs we had by storm. And then we factor in the deferred capital carrying costs, which are also part of it. And then the last piece is the accrued carrying charges. And each of those was supported by an individual distribution and transmission tab for each storm. We go ahead and split those out so we can show the difference. Distribution costs get direct assigned. Melissa can correct me if I'm wrong. And transmission costs are allocated. And so we like to go ahead and get that set up as we get into phase 2 and rate design starts happening, and we have to involve our cost of service team to help us with designing the rate. And so those should have come through as supporting work papers. And then you mentioned the benefits. Well, there'll be supporting work papers in phase 2 that will support our calculation of customer benefits and why securitization is better than traditional recovery mechanisms.
So the supporting work papers that kind of show where those numbers came from, you say the commission did receive those?
I think so.
Did ORS receive them?
Yes.
I'll ask them.
Okay.
But we think we did, but we don't know that we did.
I think Commissioner or Chair Belzer mentioned it earlier that there were the
I think they're attached to Ms. Smith's direct testimony that was pre-filed with the the petition.
I have that, and I looked at that. Is that what you're saying on the work papers?
That would be the backup, yes, the work papers.
And is that all that ORS got?
Outside of their discovery questions, yes, that would have been all they got from a work paper perspective to back up my exhibits.
Good, I'll ask him that too. Listen, I know it sounds kind of sick, and I don't want a whole bunch of numbers just for numbers, but I like that kind of stuff. So this it looks like the first opportunity I was going to be able to do that. And I did look through them, and I somehow thought there would, be more information. But if that's the work papers, that's the work papers.
Okay.
And that's what you figured from.
Yes. And so I worked with Witness Culbert's team. They have a lot of the work papers that they provided as well in discovery for the incremental charges. And then those get pushed to me to come up with a deferral schedule and what the accrued carrying charges and the return calculations look like.
But I do like your tables. They were succinct, to the point, and I think the fact that the print was small had nothing to do with you. One other question I had, just out of curiosity, and I think this would be Ms. Smith, regarding the winter storms, Jasper and Izzy. Is it Duke's contention that an accounting order must be issued for the cost to be securitized? Or is that just a recommendation?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure of the exact legal answer of that. I think from my perspective, we thought it was best to request the deferral, and alert the commission to the fact we would like to attach those charges to the securitization petition as well, so that customers could receive that benefit in the securitization docket rather than those be recovered in traditional means.
Thank you both. You've been very kind and patient. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
May I jump in before I if you don't mind. I usually try to wait till last, but I want to jump in. Following up on Commissioner Caston's last question about is a deferral necessary? If the commission approves recovery of those requested costs as storm costs in this proceeding, why would the deferral be necessary? Is that just something that needs to be on Duke's books, or to get it off the books? If the amount is included in the storm recovery, is that a mechanism that's needed for bookkeeping purposes, I reckon?
Yeah, our accounting teams would defer those, and it may be more around just, having it approved and deferred, because these costs will not get securitized until February of 2024. And so I think the idea was that we would just formally ask for the deferral so that we get the okay on that.
Okay. And
Commissioner
That is a
Belzer?
good question.
Excuse me.
Mr.
let me interrupt.
Robinson.
If I may, since that does touch on a bit of a legal question and issue, if I may provide some comments on that.
Any objection from anyone? It's a little bit out of the ordinary.
We'd like to be able to respond.
I tell you what, why don't we respond at the end? That's something we can touch on in closings. How about that? Do you
That's
mind?
fine.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
If both of you would make a note of that, because it is fair for all parties to be able to respond to any comments from council. We've talked a lot about the incremental cost of O&M, the labor, overtime. Your native employees, their base rate, their base and pay is in base rates. So the part that's being asked to be securitized with the storm, is that just the overtime? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Only the overtime of our DEP employees.
Okay.
And, for DEP employees, that is correct. What we're asking to securitize is also base labor from other affiliates.
Like from Florida or another state that are Duke employees from another state.
That's correct.
But that would include their base pay as well as any overtime.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is incremental to DEP.
Okay. I think that helps me. Ms. Culber, this is going to seem very simplistic, but could you, and I'm just going to go to your rebuttal exhibit, if you don't mind. And I think I understand this, but I just want you to walk me through that so that I make sure I'm understanding the numbers that I'm reading. The way I look at that first page is that's kind of a synopsis of all the storms added together. Is that correct? All the cost?
That's correct.
And then tell me the line 12, total DEP SC capital cost.
So those are the capital costs associated with hurricanes Matthew and Florence.
On the first page?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But then the remaining 8 pages, I reckon exhibit 2 and 8, those are by different storm. Is that correct?
That's correct. And those pages also give you the details by cost category.
I need you to pull in a little bit.
Yeah, so the additional pages in Exhibit 2 give a breakdown by the cost categories in which we track our costs.
Okay. So, and this is the culmination after the stipulation of Duke's position on the costs that you're seeking recovery of.
That is correct. After the stipulation, this includes the correction of the invoicing errors.
And this includes Duke's position relative to the 3 issues that remain in dispute.
That is correct.
Is that correct? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I just want to make sure I was following correctly. Commissioner Thomas, I think I heard you.
Thank you. Another question on the incremental versus non-incremental. And I think I heard you say that for your regular native employees, about 5% on average goes to regular O&M, and I guess that means 95% goes to projects that end up being capitalized and included in rate base at some time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the capitalized costs they're not being included in both the rate base that's going to end up being recovered, perhaps at some future rate case, and also they're not being included in both. They're not being included as a cost to be considered in this proceeding. Is that correct?
That is the straight time labor of our Duke Energy Progress employees is not included in this request of storm cost recovery.
Okay. And just kind of a little bit of a high level question, and you two may not be the right people to ask this, but I believe that the law allows for the establishment of a trust to collect in this sort of proceeding money to hold to help cover future storms. Is that your understanding?
I can take that one. I might need a little clarification. When you say trust, are you referring to like a storm reserve or like a trust account to hold cash?
A storm reserve.
Okay. Yes, this statute does allow for a storm reserve to be funded through securitization. That is my understanding.
And are you aware whether or not any conversations have occurred as to would that be wise to go ahead and ask for more money to fund a reserve? I guess one of my thoughts or questions or concerns is that if we end up going through this process, there's probably going to be a line item on the customer's bills for who knows how long. Let's just use 20 years as an example. And then if we get out 5 years in the future and we've had, some more storms and we do this again, then could be a second line item and so on ends up being 2, 3, 4 line items for storm recovery. And I guess my question is, does it make any sense to go ahead and collect some of that money now in order to perhaps prevent there being another line item in the not too distant future? Are you aware if any conversations have happened along those lines?
So I did actually address that in my direct testimony. I was going to turn to that real quick if you could bear with me. I'll just further say we didn't propose a storm reserve in this proceeding, but if you'll recall, we just finished up our rate case for DEP South Carolina, and we did establish a storm reserve there. I think there have been some initial conversations about the possibility of funding the storm reserve up front using securitization. I'm not sure how far those conversations have gone, but it's definitely an option that is on the table if the commission so decides.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Justin Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, ladies.
Good afternoon.
So the theme of my questions will follow two old adages that my family instilled in me. The first is begin with the end in mind. And the second is someone's failure to plan should not become another person's burden to carry. So I want to talk about planning. And it's interesting that I can't remember which one of you testified to the fact that, at least the way I understood the testimony, that even being here today and you providing the testimony about the cost that should be included in securitization probably started about 10 years ago as the company was deciding what to do with some of those storm costs. And it appears to me that there was some thought at some point decision makers in the company felt as if securitization was coming to South Carolina. Is that fair to say?
I think that would be a fair statement.
Okay. So as I look around the room, I see several familiar faces that attended some of the public hearings that we held in DEP's most recent rate case. And securitization came up there, and considering beginning with the end in mind, I'm picturing if securitization goes through, if it passes, in this case, ultimately there will be a line item charge on customers' monthly bill. Is that correct?
That is correct. There would be a storm recovery charge on their monthly bill.
Okay. What I want to know is if there's anyone in your organization, not just DEP, but anyone in the Duke organization that has performed or even read any analysis, study, or model about the potential for increased damage, economic damage, globally, domestically, or even to the grid due to climate change.
Commissioner Williams, I will tell you I am aware that Duke Energy is engaging in a climate and resiliency study, maybe to address your question, but that is the limit of my knowledge. I know we have engaged in such study.
Can you tell me a little bit about the climate and resiliency study?
Honestly, I know the name of it, and I assume it addresses looking at what our climate change is going to present for the company.
Right. So you're not familiar with the interagency working group?
No, sir, I'm not.
You're not familiar with the intergovernmental panel on climate change?
No, sir.
Okay. So hypothetically, well, before I get there, let's talk about the 8 storms. Is it fair to say that the 8 storms, I think it's 8 storms that are included here, were storms that were extraordinary, each of them?
Yes.
So each of the 8 storms were extraordinary, meaning more catastrophic, caused more damage than you would have thought or your model would have suggested or predicted.
I would say the definition of extraordinary is to our normal, a normal year. These storms impacted us not every year, and therefore were extraordinary in each year.
Okay. So were the storms extraordinary, or are they being defined as extraordinary because the storms didn't happen every year? Was it an extraordinary storm or an extraordinary year?
I think an extraordinary storm when you look at the impact, as Witness Weir described.
How many ordinary storms were there?
I do not have that information.
Were there any ordinary storms?
Yes, I mean.
Likely,
yes.
I mean, we consider summer thunderstorms ordinary storms.
Okay. So, is it possible that the storms are getting worse?
I'm not an expert in that area to say that.
Okay. Let's just and I appreciate that. But if someone in your organization believes or has reason to believe storms are getting worse, would that create the need to do something about that now? Whether it's hardening or how you request for securitization to be packaged. Commissioner Thomas mentioned the storm reserves. Is there something that could be, if that is the case, because you say you don't know and I don't know, so this is a hypothetical. Would that create the need to do something about potential increases in damage caused from storms as a result of climate change to do something about that now?
Hypothetically, I believe we all should be addressing the impact that these storms are causing. And there's multiple ways to do that, I believe, as you described.
Okay. I'm not really sure what I described. What did I describe?
You mentioned considering climate studies, storm hardening, those types of activities, or storm reserves. They're different mechanisms, was my point.
Right. Well, I can't direct the utility, so I appreciate that, and I'm being educated on the information. I'm not asserting it's true or untrue. I'm just asking questions as the utility with the responsibility for planning and making decisions. I want to make sure that, let's say 10 years from now, whether or not we're on the commission or not, there's not testimony coming from the company that says something to the effect, we had 8 extraordinary storms that we've never seen the likes of before, and no one knew that it was coming. When in fact, there may be evidence that storms are getting worse. That's what I'm trying to prevent.
And I understand your position, but I am not in a position to speak to what the company's doing in that area.
Okay. Commissioner Powers mentioned this lightheartedly, and I don't know if this is a proper approach or not, and you may not be the witnesses to go through or go down this road with, but putting lines underground or doing anything other than what is the traditional method of providing transmission, is that something that is under consideration?
I know that undergrounding is a consideration, but I do not know the specifics of when, where, those types of things.
Okay. All right, last question for you. It has nothing to do with the questions I've asked up to this point. I think I've heard one of you, and I know I heard your lawyer say that ORS's review was very detailed. I can't remember exactly the words, but something to the effect of the most rigorous or stringent review that ORS has conducted, or maybe the most stringent and rigorous review that the company has ever faced. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement.
So what was so different about this audit or review versus other audits and review that have happened in the past?
I'll answer. You can chime in too. Our experience in most audits is that we provide a list of the transactions from our general ledger system, and there's a sampling of those. So there's requests for a random selection and a sampling of invoices or different transactions. The ORS requested copies of all of our invoices and all of our contracts and all of our expense transactions, like our employee expense transactions. So that resulted in over 3,700 invoices, over 11,000 expense transactions, and hundreds of different contracts, trying to provide all of the supporting documentation for the costs incurred. So a little more extensive than we're used to with just a sampling.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And either one of you can answer this, I hope. Your outside contractors that you deal with, and without it naming any names or any areas or anything else, do you find discrepancies in their billing or in how they fairness in what you're required to pay to different companies or different contractors?
I'm not familiar with pay rates in the contracts. I'm familiar with their processes of billing. You know, I understand their invoicing, and those come in, and all of those, although different, they're fair, and we are able to audit them, but I am not familiar with their rate structures.
I think what I'm trying to get at is when you have someone who's costing, disparaging, does Duke react or seek other contractors, or do they just call somebody out about their prices, or is that something you don't know?
I do not know.
Okay.
Exactly.
Your workers, obviously, just as other companies come in, your workers go and help in other places when there's storms and different things. I know there's a big presence back with the bad storms, Louisiana and different things. Is Duke compensated when you do that, or how does that process work?
So through the Southeast Energy Exchange, there's a mutual aid agreement, and any of our support to neighboring utilities or neighboring utilities for us is at cost. There's no markup of so there's no benefit, no profit for our crews going to other utilities or vice versa.
Okay, and how are those costs determined? Just flat price of gasoline, price of hotels, price of food?
I mean, we just like we set up unique project IDs for our storms internally. We set up unique project IDs for our crews that are traveling, and they record all of their time, their expenses, their fleet costs, their gas costs. All of that's recorded to that unique project ID so that we can isolate it for billing.
Yeah, and I was being a little lighthearted because people do ask why aren't things put underground, and I think the point of all that is I think Commissioner Williams and I both are looking at long-term how to handle these things rather than short-term, because I've got beach property. There's always going to be another storm, and always watch TV and bite your fingernails and hope it goes away. But those sort of things, and of course, I think we both encourage Duke to look at long-term. If you don't have a program, create one where some think tank or somebody is looking at long-term storm chances, and if there is an increase. Thank you.
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Thank you for being here. I'm going to ask my questions, and either of you can answer. One you've heard before. I'm not sure if either of you can add or can address the question of the role of FEMA in declaring disasters, and it's not anything that is in the testimony, and so I'm just asking from a education perspective, does it make a difference if a disaster area is determined?
So it's my understanding that some of our co-ops get relief from FEMA, but Duke Energy does not get any relief from FEMA after an event like this. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
More specifically than I ask it. And then native and non-native has been referenced a lot. Could you define that for me?
Yes. So our native contractors are working on the Duke system on a day-to-day basis. So they are helping us with our normal work activities, our work plan, whether it be system upgrades, customer additions, or response to customer issues, maintenance, that type of thing.
And that's whether Duke system or Duke Carolinas?
Would be DEP.
Okay.
Yeah. Non-native contractors are those that come from any other Duke affiliate, and then we classify anyone coming from off the Duke system as off-system contractors.
Okay. So I'm debating asking a question that has to do with the cost that you budget for with your native employees and that are included in cost recovery in your base cost. With a level 3 event, those people are reassigned to other projects, and you're asking for recovery of that whole cost. And I think it's been asked before and answered. Is it just the overtime, or is it their entire cost associated with the level 3 events?
So for native resources, I'll say, Duke Energy Progress employees, only their overtime associated with those storms is considered incremental cost. For our native contractors, all of their cost is considered incremental. The majority of their time for our contractors is on capital work.
Right.
So when they move over on storm restoration, which is mostly repair, that's incremental O&M costs for the company. Plus, they have to return to finish that work that we have them. They were on a job site adding a new customer. They were doing a system upgrade. They're expected to go back and return that work and complete the other work that's been scheduled for them. I referenced earlier the vegetation management
Right.
example is the best. Now, their majority of their costs are O&M in their normal work plan, but they are required to finish that normal work plan when they finish their storm restoration
Right.
duties.
But tell me if this is what you're saying, that the base rate includes their level 3 normal work hours included in that cost.
The base rates do not include the level 3
Okay.
hours.
I haven't figured out how to ask what I'm concerned about, and it really has to do with double counting and what we're covering within the base rate. But it seems you've said with DEP that we're only paying with level 3 for the overtime. But then where are we accounting for the normal time if they're totally focused on during the days of this event? How are we paying for their time?
So for Duke Energy employees, their straight time is recovered in our base rates. So that
Okay.
is non-incremental. That is not included
Okay.
in our request.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Smith, in your supporting work papers, for example, I'm looking at transmission, PAX, and Ulysses, and I'm seeing a month and year. And I see, would you pick a page and just talk me through it? And I think what I'm thinking about is, what do these numbers mean? It's titled supporting work paper, but is this enough is really my question. And so maybe by your explaining what I'm looking at, I can answer that question myself.
Yeah, so I would say the basis of my work papers is to take the incremental costs that have been passed over to me from the finance groups and Witness Call-Rest organization, and then apply our carrying charges to those. And so can we look at maybe Hurricane Matthew? Because I think I could give you the most complete rundown. It's going to be small, it looks like. The Hurricane Matthew.
Yes, I can read
you give
that.
us a page?
The 14 storms,
Can
I don't think it'll explain.
Can you give us
this
a
one.
page of those work papers, please?
Yes, let's see.
I didn't see a page.
Or somebody.
I'm not sure if they were numbered when they were passed over. One,
You're working
two,
it
it would be
clear.
like the third page in the work papers.
God. Talking about readability.
Are you where you need to be, or you struggling? Yes, ma'am. Okay, so Hurricane Matthew occurred in October of 16. So you're going to see that is the first line for the month and year, October of 16. And over to the right, you're going to see deferred O&M expenses. And this is how we start tracking the cumulative deferral. And so This one, I wanted to use this one because this is actually one that had capital assets as part of the storm. Matthew and Florence were the only two storms where we had capital assets. So you'll see where we calculate our monthly depreciation, and then we accumulate accumulated depreciation. We have in this particular one, and this is the only one where this column is reflected, we have our bonus depreciation reduction that I talked about a lot in my testimony, and we come down to what the rate base is. So that is how we start calculating the deferred cost of capital and the deferred depreciation expense. And those are the items that got deferred until these capital assets went into rate base in the 2018 rate case, which was June of 2019. So you'll see as you go down in June of 2019, the deferral of those costs actually ends and you have no more accumulation of those costs. And so that's where the deferral stops. And then over to the far right, you're going to see the after-tax debt component. And in this particular one, because I'm not sure if these were provided with my rebuttal, you'll see debt and equity. This would have been the original submission that we had at our WAC return. So this would have been prior to the stipulation. And so we accumulate, through these different calculations, what the monthly return components are going to be. And then we come up with our cumulative balance. And then that cumulative balance is what is flowing to my first exhibit, or my exhibit 1, that says when we get to February of 2024, this is the amount we're going to securitize for the distribution costs for Hurricane Matthew. And there is one of these schedules for every distribution and transmission piece of the storms.
Will these work papers be updated to reflect the stipulation once we get to the financing order stage?
Yes, I think there will be a compliance set of these work papers after we get through phase 1, and the commission has determined what the prudently incurred costs are. We do have some updates to carrying charges that we need to make as a result of the finalization of the most recent progress rate case. And so there are some updates. And so these are still estimated amounts, but based on whatever comes out in your order for phase 1, they will be updated.
That's very helpful. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Irvin, are you wanting to ask a question?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. I have a budgeting question or an accounting question for you, the panel. As I understand it, this the bills that were incurred for these storms, these 8 storms, they're actually listed on the books of Duke Energy Progress as an asset. Is that correct? For accounting purposes?
Yes, that would be correct.
And so you use this new securitization process to essentially document the prudently incurred cost. And you've kind of already done most of that with ORS. We have a stipulation that we can approve if we find that the evidence supports it. And then whatever that figure is, you do a financing order, and then you take that asset to market and sell it. And the money that you get for the sale of the asset then wipes the books clean of the storm cost. Is that how it works?
That is my high-level understanding. I'm prepared mostly for phase 1 today, but that is my understanding of what happens as we go through phase 2 and phase 3 from a high level.
Right. And maybe you're not the one to ask, but you could refer me to someone that might testify later. I'm wondering how that money is going to be, the money from the sale of the asset is going to be credited to the Duke Energy Progress accounting books and procedures? How does it, where does it go? Is kind of what I'm thinking. Where does that money go? Does this become an asset of the company? Go to shareholders?
I think the money goes straight to the utility, is my understanding.
Okay.
I am not familiar with all the accounting entries that get made and when we
Right.
clear the deferral from the books, but it's my understanding that the utility gets the cash.
Okay. And included in the cost will be, if we approve an accounting order, any cost incurred in the process, like expert witness fees, accounting fees, attorney's fees, fees to pay the third party that sells the asset. All those costs will be rolled in to what ultimately ends up on the customer's bill as a line item, right?
It is correct that the upfront fees for the debt issuance costs would be rolled in, and the examples you gave, I believe that would be correct. But again, that will be discussed more and laid out in phase 2.
Sure, I understand. I'm just trying to get a little bit of a head start.
Okay.
I don't have an accounting background, so I'm just trying to get it clear in my mind, exactly try to follow the money trail. But I think generally, we're talking, it's a new process for us, and I know it is for you, but have I kind of got it right in terms of how I described the securitization process?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm going to move on to another subject that my colleagues brought up earlier, and they are intuitive. Commissioner Justin Williams, and to some degree, I believe Commissioner Powers mentioned that it seems like storms are getting more severe. And should we consider that in our long-term planning? And there has been, and there is scientific evidence that due to global warming, there has been an increase in major tropical cyclone exceedance probability over the past 4 decades. And I'll tell you that for any of those of you that might be interested, that study was completed in May 18 of 2020, I believe. And it was done by, Time Magazine is the one that wrote the article about it, but the study itself was done by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And it was published April 10th of 2020. But the interesting thing, they went back and looked at all the Atlantic and North Atlantic hurricanes all the way back to 1970. They've actually got a graph that shows the intensity of them. And without going into great detail, there have been more Category 3 hurricanes in the last 10 years than in recorded history. And so it's been scientifically proven that when the carbon dioxide and methane has entered our atmosphere has allowed the seas to warm, and that increases intensity as the wind passes over the ocean. And I thought it was interesting that that they have already studied it, and that they predict with reasonable certainty that trend will continue. And I just throw that out. I'm pleased to hear that Duke is thinking about looking at those facts, because if they are increasing, and 5 of the 9 most severe storms have happened in the last 5 years, scientists predict that we'll have more, and it will be more frequent, it'll be more intense. And so Commissioner Justin Williams is right kind of have to plan for that. And part of that is storm hardening, as you all discussed. And I'm just wondering, you know, if you could you could get an expert in finance and analytics to look at what has to happen when you have a Cat 3 hurricane hit the South Carolina coast in terms of replacing transformers and poles and wire. Would it be cost effective, for example, to get more up-to-date transformers and wire that can withstand high winds? Do y'all know if anybody's looking at that kind of futuristic approach?
Yeah, I am not aware of the detailed forecasting or approaches that the company's taking in that area.
Right. Well, I commit it to you because I think, unfortunately, we've got that to look forward to. Seems like the weather has changed dramatically in my lifetime. Commissioner Caston mentioned his allergies. I can remember my allergies didn't kick in until April. Now they start in February. So, yeah, that's some. I suppose some evidence is getting warmer in our hemisphere at least. And so I think we need to look at it. And to the extent, for example, since you're in budgeting, let me ask you this. Do you all buy transformers and rolls of wire and poles in advance and kind of stage them in certain areas in the event, you know, so that you can get it to them quickly in the event of a hurricane?
Yes, sir, we do. We have transformers, poles, and wire in inventory. And when the storm starts approaching, the planning and logistics team that Witness Weir mentioned is looking at where are the impacts, can we move materials ahead of it so that they're, you know, strategically located for a quick response when needed.
Right. And by the way, I think y'all have done a great job with that. I remember sitting in on several hearings where you had actually staged your employees in various locations in advance of the storm. So that takes a lot of pre-planning and kind of logistical knowledge, but I'm glad that you do a great job with that. And I think that helps our customers in your service area by getting that power restored much more quickly. But my next question is, I've been reading about there's backlog for transformers because of supply chain issues. Are y'all seeing some of that? Do you know?
Yeah, I think the entire country is seeing some impact from transformer shortages.
And now the next question to follow is then, is there any way to try to buy them in bulk? Would be any cost savings, for example, if you could kind of stock them up in advance, you know, so that you're ready for the next 2 or 3 storms?
I'm not exactly sure of the best approach, but I do know that our supply chain organization is looking at different strategies to try to make sure we have the adequate transformers needed.
Right. Well, that would be good. I know down in Florida, they had a heck of a time cleaning up with Hurricane Ian because of the massive property loss. And a lot of those folks will never go back, particularly on the barrier islands that were just totally destroyed. And but I think I heard that some of the Duke folks went down to help with that. Is that right? Some of our people went down there to assist.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
And so I think that, you know, I'm glad we have that unpack with our neighbors in the Southeast, because the looks of, you know, what we saw on television with Ian, I don't know, it'll take a decade or more for some of those communities to recover their infrastructure. But I was very impressed with the way that electricity was restored so quickly. And again, that speaks well for your industry. But I appreciate y'all being with us today, and thank you for answering my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. It is 5 minutes after 1. We're going to break for lunch until 2:30. Ladies, I do need to ask you, you're still under oath, you're still on the stand. Please don't discuss your testimony with anyone or allow anyone to discuss it with you. Thank you. 2:30.